these people that she was able to convert, these are the second group of people that she was able to convert into the restoration of the Ten Commandments cult. And she's building this ground up. She killed her old self, built up her new self, found Joseph, knew he was the perfect mark to be her partner, manipulated him and his family for his money and credibility and power, used that to then be able to find the clergy people who had legitimacy in the actual Catholic Church, had deep connections, were highly educated, and knew a lot of people in the surrounding communities to be her next group of converts. So then people started trickling in like a flood. She was able to spot the proper people to convert early on to be able to bring more and more and more converts to her congregation. And her tactic for being able to spot the right people is why she was able to convert the right people. She was able to go into whole entire communities, say a speech, and convert them all to be a part of the restoration of the Ten Commandments cult. When I tell you, child, when I tell you her manipulation, her control, nothing, the way she read people, unheard of. Unheard of.
Be fooled. And you too, Mrs. Spears. Death to all of them.
Hello, 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 and welcome to the Madison channel. My name is Madison, and today we have a part one of a two-parter cult true crime and society video, and I bet you it's a cult you've never heard of. So if that excites you and you're new here, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when I post another video. If you're returning, love you, so happy that you're here again. Please comment and like the video so it can do well in the algorithm. Your girl is finally monetized, so watch my ads, y'all. Watch my ads if you want more content, y'all. Okay, so yeah, before we get into this video, and like I said, it's a two-parter, I want to do a little housekeeping. There are a couple things I want to say to y'all, and then we'll get right into the story. So, I guess topic number one, I've been kind of MIA. I needed a little break. Like some of you know, and I posted on the community tab. I'm pretty active on my community tab if you want to check in there to see what's going on with me. I do a lot of polls, get a lot of your opinions on stuff, and just check in there, typically to just touch base with y'all. I ask lots of questions about videos. Should I cut this up? Should I keep it long? Stuff like that. So that being said, check me out there. But my grandpa passed away this May, and we had his memorial on the 21st of July. And I've been working through all of that time, filming and posting and TikToking and all of this stuff. And actually, my most successful video that I've ever done was posted the morning of his memorial, which is kind of crazy. But so thank you, Grandpa. Love you. He was watching down on me for that one for sure. But I just needed a little bit of a break, so I took a break. I took the time that I needed. I'm back. I'm better than ever. And I am keeping the ball rolling. So that's where I've been. If you were wondering, just needed to take a little time away from TikTok, away from YouTube. Yes. But because that video did so well, and the video I'm talking about is obviously the girl in the picture video, where I did an interview, a 3-part interview with the half brother of the girl in the picture. His name is Jonathan Brandenburg, and if you haven't seen those 3 videos, please check them out on my channel. They're really interesting. It provides a lot of context to a lot of the missing pieces of that documentary. I think it should have been a docuseries, but anywho. And on that topic, Jonathan, basically, good news, got a job, which was really exciting, but actually he ended up getting struck by a car on the job. So if you're feeling giving, if you're feeling like you want to give to him, there is, in the pinned comment below this video, is his Venmo, and it'll also be in the description below. But check it out, and if you feel like blessing him, especially because he contributed so much to giving us more insight on the girl in the picture doc, I highly recommend sending him a little something. You know, I think he deserves it. He's a great man. And, you know, sometimes people need a little extra help. So there's that. But those videos did so well, and so well that I like greatly expanded my YouTube channel based off of the excitement around those videos. Hopefully there's more to come. I hope I can do more interviews. That was my very first one. But hello to all the new people that are here. I'm glad you decided to stay. I hope you enjoy the content. There's a bunch of videos that you can catch up on. And, you know, stick around, watch the vids. I have lots of good stuff. I'm starting to do my scripts for next year for my true crime stuff. And I hope you guys are pumped about that. But I just wanted to say welcome, love y'all, feeling the support, and we are on the road to 10K. So let's get that shit. I guess the last thing I want to say is, again, on my community tab, I posted about a giveaway I'm doing a, first place, second place, third place thing with Amazon gift cards. I'm not rich, child. So the first place is going to win a $30 Amazon gift card. The second place is going to win a $25. And the third place is going to win a $15. So let me know if that sounds exciting to you. If you want to do that, their rules are in my community tab. So just search it up and find it. They are there, and you will know exactly how to win that moolah. But yeah, I guess that being said, I just want to again thank y'all for getting me to monetizable points. There's lots more to come on this channel, and the stories for next year, child. Ooh, you're gonna be shook. That being said, without further ado, let's get into the part 1 of the restoration of the 10 Commandments cult story. Boom, boom. Love y'all. So, here we are. If you don't know it by now, cults are something that I'm incredibly interested by, period. Jonestown is something I've been incredibly interested by. Heaven's Gate, Scientology. Cults in general are just such an interesting interpersonal phenomena, socially, societally, the way that, you know, they all use similar tactics, the type of people it attracts. And to be fair, I was kind of ignorant in my concept of cults for a long time. And I just basically kind of was like, you know, Black people don't really join cults, which is like an often, like, kind of a widespread mythos around cults. Like, it's a white people thing. White people do that. Now, obviously, with Jonestown, that was not true. It was definitely a very integrated society. I have a whole Jonestown documentary reaction on this channel. It's like my second or third video, so check that out, ciao. But that being said, I was really ignorant about what I thought about cults and who joined cults. And then, you know, when I came across this cult, I realized, bitch, you're Americanized. You're Americanized, you know? Like, the cults in America present a certain way, but cults happen all over the world, and you are centering the American experience when it comes to cults. So when I learned about the restoration of the 10 Commandments cult that was based in Uganda, I knew that I had to make a true crime and society video about it, because it's one of the crazier cult stories. It didn't happen in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s. This happened in the year 2000. Okay, so it's a new millennium cult. It's centered around Catholicism. It's technically an extremist Catholic cult. It ends in a very tragic way, similar to a Jonestown, and it is kind of an end of the world type of cult, which most of them are. But I was ignorant. And through this experience of researching this story, I learned so much, and I'm so excited to share it with you guys. So let's get into the story. Also, quickly, before we get into this video, I'm going to put a couple resource links in the description box. One of them is signs you're in a cult, or signs someone you know is in a cult. I think that's really important because, you know, we get indoctrinated in different ways now because the internet, the algorithms. I think it's important to kind of check yourself and see if the ideology you're attaching yourself to could potentially lead you down a dangerous path. And I'm going to link a website called cult.escape.com. And that's for people who are considering leaving, or families of people who are in a cult that you want to kind of see the process of what it is to leave or get someone help to leave. So those links will be down below, just because I think, y'all, let's not be frank. I think a lot of misconceptions around people who join cults are, they're dumb, they're lonely, they're sad, what's wrong with them. They get a lot. Not only are they beating themselves up when they leave the cult, but they get it from the outside world. And I think what we need to understand is truly anyone could be a part of a cult. Anyone could be indoctrinated into a cult. It just takes the right type of manipulation. And honestly, we're seeing that now with the QAnon, with the alt-right online movement. That's a conversation for another day. But I just wanted to add those resources there, make them available, just so that, at the end of the day, if you know someone, if you think you are, check out the resources and let yourself, research for yourself. Let's get into the story. So, the Restorations of 10 Commandments cult. Again, this is part 1 of part 2. So we're laying down the foundation. We're laying down the context. What was Uganda like at the time? Who was a leader of this cult? How did they find each other? How did they start to build what was known to be the Restoration for the 10 Commandments cult? Now, the timing of this cult, to give you some context, it really started in 1989 and ended in 2000 abruptly. We'll get into that later. And it was in Uganda during a very volatile time in Ugandan history. Now, in 1962, Uganda was able to get into independence from the British. If you don't know, a lot of African countries got independence from their colonial forefathers, forebears, captive makers, all of those things. Around the 1960s, there's a huge push for African nations to become independent. So you'll see that with a lot of former colonies, their independence starts within the 70s or the 60s. And Uganda was one of the earlier ones in 1962. And of course, this function was only a name only, because we know a lot of times with these colonial independence things, there's a lot of sabotage on behalf of the colonial power in order to continue to exploit these places for their natural resources economically. So that's another conversation for another day. But in name alone, Uganda got independence from the British in 1962. Period. So in the time of this cult's inception in the 1980s, in the late 1980s, there is a brutal dictatorship in power. I believe his name was Idi Amin Dada, something to that effect. I'm sorry if I butchered it, but he was a dictator in the 1980s. It was brutal, it was volatile, it was a violent time, and because of the volatile nature of this time in Ugandan history, a lot of the records for this cult are not widely available. In fact, it was a function of the cult that only the leaders of the cult could keep records of what was going on. So that also added to the fact that a lot of these records have not been found. There's a lot of holes in the stories, and a lot of this information is secondhand. On top of that, a lot of very high up governmental people in Uganda were actually either a part of this cult or benefited from the cult's resources in some way or another, either politically, financially, or whatever. So I think that's also why a lot of the records of this story are really hard to get your hands on. So it isn't until the spring of 2000 that you start to see more of a clear story kind of start to develop around who started the cult, what happened in the cult, and why did it end up being such a tragic story. So just full disclosure, there's a lot of holes, but we're working around the holes. Okay. So just warning, the brutality of how this cult ended was so brutal that it had people wondering, were these people doing a mass unaliving event like a lot of people considered with Jonestown, or were they mass unalived, if you know what I mean? Was it a schmooicide or was it a murder type of thing? Now that I'm monetized, I can't be as free with my language, but you know what I mean. Like, and that's often when these big situations happen, and they're usually religion based. It's like, what actually happened? And because so much of the record of this religion wasn't kept or wasn't widely available, lots of people question to this day whether it was this or that. To me, I think it was they were unalived. I don't think they agreed or consented to this being a reality. And by part 2, at the end of part 2, you'll understand why. But yeah, it kind of is, to me, representative, kind of similar to Jonestown in a lot of ways. The amount of people who were involved in this organization, their goals, living off the land, farming, things like that, and also being controlled by an unstable, mentally ill leader. We'll get more into those kind of comparisons in a little bit. But before we do that, let's have a little bit of context for the basis of the doctrine of the restoration of the Ten Commandments cult. Okay. So the reality is this cult was based in Catholicism. Now, I've said this before about my personal religious history in my life. I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, which has a basis in Christianity, but it's a different sect of Christianity. And when it was created or whatever, widely adopted or starting to be, it was thought to be a cult similarly too. I think all kind of sects of specific religious ideology start off being like, these people are crazy, these people are kooky, and all of that. So again, I'm not coming from a judgmental place, but the basic basis of this cult, which ended up being a dangerous cult, is Catholicism. Okay? Keep that in mind. Catholicism. We can't talk about the introduction of Catholicism into the African continent without talking about colonialism and missionaries and how heavy missionary work, spreading Christianity, spreading Catholicism was in the continent of Africa in the 19th century. Specifically in Uganda, in the 19th century, first you had Islam that came, missionaries of Islam came to introduce Islam into the African continent. But pre-colonialism, the religion of the territory was a monotheistic religion with one God, but a God of many different names. And that kind of history got wiped away through the introduction of Islam, and then later the introduction of European missionaries and Catholicism to the region. Okay? Ciao. And that's a whole conversation for another day. It's about erasure. It's about race politics. It's about a lot of stuff. But yeah, we can't talk about this story without talking about the inception of how Catholicism was introduced to these communities, and oftentimes around it was violence and denial of identity and lots of things. Very painful history that has to do with missionary work. But yeah, so Catholicism was originally introduced in 1879 to Uganda specifically, but it grew in popularity in the 20th century due to multiple people having a Marian sighting. Now, this is kind of an interesting aspect of Catholicism that I didn't know until researching this specific story. A Marian sighting or Marian apparition is when somebody has a visualization of the Virgin Mary, and in some specific area, in some specific place, and the Virgin Mary gives them a message, or she shows herself to said individual. And from that experience, that place where that sighting allegedly happened could be blessed by the Pope and made a holy place. Okay? Could be blessed by the Pope, acknowledged by the Pope and made a holy place, a holy siting. And so many Catholics around the world will know, okay, these are where Marian apparitions have happened that were approved by the Pope, and I'm going to go to these places to feel the energy of the space and to feel really holy, like going to Mecca or something like that. So a Marian apparition, to me, I was like, I've never heard of this before, but it is a widespread phenomenon, and there's lots of Marian apparitions or claims of Marian apparitions all over the world, but only a very few are also corroborated by the Pope and also made holy places by the Vatican. Okay? So for a country like Uganda that's very young, having a Marian apparition in your nation could make your nation more attractive for people to want to visit and follow and go like a Mecca to pay their respects. So there were a lot of Marian apparitions that were happening in Uganda, and the growing popularity in the 20th century of Catholicism started to take hold. So even if your Marian apparition wasn't officially underscored by the Pope itself, you could still have a lot of notoriety locally and maybe even internationally if you claim to have a Marian apparition. Now, put a pin in that, because that is where a lot of this kind of begins. Now, we're going to introduce you to the very first person of the leadership of this cult. Her official leadership title is the programmer, and her name is Credonia. So let's get into her story. So Credonia is probably one of the most important figure in the creation of this cult, because she is a creator, she is a programmer, as I like to call her. A lot of her early life is not really on record, and that's on purpose. Part of it has to do with the Ugandan Civil War and people's records not being kept track of, but also part of it is a mystique that she created around herself in order to rebirth herself from her past to be able to become the leader of this cult. So what we do know about her was that she was born in 1952. Humble beginnings, poor family, very strictly religious, but she was innately rebellious. Her and her parents did not get along. She felt very restricted by them. They did not get along in the slightest, and she had a really hard time growing up. She was labeled pretty early on as being promiscuous, being crazy, being rebellious, so she kind of had a hard go of it, especially in her particularly religious community with her particularly religious parents. She was highly judged by her community, just like point blank, period. A lot of people described her as being quick to anger and being in constant fights with her parents and just never agreeing. So in her early 20s, she had her eyes set on an older medical worker in the community who basically she thought would be able to save her from her situation with her family, with her parents, pull her out of the hell she was experiencing because she just fundamentally could not get along with these people. And that medical worker was basically, how the story goes, or how people tell the story, is she was very infatuated, but she saw a way out for herself. So she proposed marriage to this man. He rejected her flat out, and she did not take that well. So she snuck into his home and burned up his entire house with his belongings inside. Just everything completely burned to the ground. And that's when she was thrown into the mental institution, which is... Yes, so she was thrown into the mental institution. Again, there's not a lot of records of this time. There's not a lot of knowledge of this time. We just know these certain places where her story would pop up. So she was thrown in the mental institution and then eventually labeled as too mentally disturbed to help. So she was kicked out. And that's where her disdain for psychology and things like that started to kind of really come out. She thought it was a waste of time. She thought it was completely unnecessary. But a lot of people looking back said that, She probably had something along the lines of maybe BPD, borderline personality disorder. She showed signs of that, some signs of being a sociopath, which we'll see in this story, of course. But long story short, had a history of mental illness, did not get along with her parents. So, yes, this is Credonia in her early 20s. The thing about Credonia that everyone knew was that she was incredibly charismatic. She was incredibly jarring. She was loud. People followed her. She could manipulate people. She could wrap people around her finger. And so, in the case of as she was growing up, after this whole stint at the mental institution and after she was kicked out, you know, she decided to lean more into that, kind of lean more into her gifts with her interpeople skills. And, you know, it got her in trouble a lot of the time, but that's something that she was starting to hone in during this time. Manipulation, charisma, all of these things. And that led her into her first marriage. She was, I think, the second or third wife of a local man. And quickly, she was able to oust that first wife. And everyone knows in, you know, places where multiple wives are common, the first wife has a lot of the respect. The first wife has been there the longest, all of these things. So to let you know how in control she was of this situation, she was able to, within months, get this man to break up with the first wife, sell all her belongings as well as her house, and give her all the money so that she could start a bar in the village. And like I said, there's not a lot of information about this girl. Cardonia's life is a mystery before a certain point. But what a lot of people did say is that girl could brew her a good banana beer. So the bar was a quick success and people were coming. She finally kind of found purpose. She was getting her groove and she, you know, owned this bar and was living her life and it was working. It was working for her. But instead of really honing in onto this new lease on life, having a husband, having a successful business in the community, she kind of leaned towards the other direction and became more violent. There's this unverified story. I told this part on TikTok. An unverified story by a family friend, but it's widely spread to be true. In sometime in the 1980s, in the village, there was a traveler that came, passing through. And Credonia invited this traveler into the bar to have a drink and, you know, invited them to take a load off before they continued on their travels. All people know is that the next morning, when the morning crew, the people who got their drinks before work, came in, Credonia was on her hands and knees scrubbing a blood-stained, blood-soaked concrete floor. And what's worse, she looked up at them, asked them for their orders, and acted like nothing was going on. They never heard or saw from that traveler ever again, and no one really ever questioned it or asked her any questions about it, but it was widely thought that she had unalived this person, right? And according to this particular family friend, that's one instance of many instances where people would come into the bar and catch her in cleaning up a violent act, doing something violent to somebody else, and she would make a joke, she would laugh it off. She never thought it was serious, especially even when she was caught in the act. She didn't care, which goes to show kind of the sociopathic nature of some of Cardonia's diagnoses in action, child. So in 1981, our girl Credonia had her first Marian apparition. Now, full disclosure, this is her saying. In 1981, she had her first Marian apparition. There's no one else to corroborate it. It was not underscored by the Pope by any means. So a lot of people believe she made this up as a mythos to how she became the programmer in the cult eventually. But she had her first Marian apparition in 1981 that basically told her that she has so much potential and she needs to start leaning into her potential. She could be a leader. That's what she claims the Virgin Mary told her. So that really stayed with her. That really, touched her soul and affected her. While this is going on in the 80s, like I said, there's a dictatorship happening, pretty brutal, pretty violent. And she's starting to kind of see that in the mess and the muck and the volatile nature of what's going on around her politically, she could use this time, the confusion, the stress, to maybe launch herself into legitimacy and maybe become a prominent person in the church. Because what the Virgin Mary also said was that you need to go back to what you forsake as a child, which was Catholicism. So, things start brewing, and she kind of sees, even though there's death, violence, and all of these things, uncertainty around her, she sees it as a huge opportunity to potentially go to the next level. So in Credonia's mind, she wanted to emulate Mary Magdalene's life. So what did that mean for her? She wanted to play up the fact that she was having a sinful life and a sinful life experience before she eventually got saved and entered Catholicism. So this is all her building, creating the mythos around who she wanted to be when it came to a leader, a saint, going into this religious field, right? So at this point, in the muck of confusion in the Civil War, she starts to lean into the rumors of her being promiscuous. She starts to do more sinful things. She starts a bunch of rumors about herself, that she's a prostitute as well as a bartender. And of course, her husband, who paid for this whole building, who paid for her whole business, is not feeling the fact that there are a ton of rumors circling his wife about her being a prostitute, her being super sinful, her being all of these negative things. So he's kind of getting upset, and he ends up leaving her because of all of this muck around her image. She thinks that's a wonderful thing, because this adds legitimacy that her life was sinful, that she was a prostitute, that she was walking in the footsteps of Mary Magdalene, and she could really use that in her mythos, in her story making for who she wanted to be. So the fact that her husband left, the fact that her business now was going down the tubes, and the Civil War is beginning to engulf the entire nation was all good to her, because she was already thinking 40 steps ahead on how to use that and make her story, which is really kind of impressive. She's a marketing genius, child. She's a marketing genius. So her husband leaves, the war's getting more intense, and 1989 comes around, and this is a super important year. Remember, the cult started in 1989 to 2000, so this is a super important year. So on June 14th, which is crazy, it's my older sister's birthday, but on June 14th, 1989, Credonia had her second Marian apparition again. This is all based on the story she shrouded herself in. Is this true? I don't believe there's a lick of truth to this, but she claimed that she was traveling, went into a cave, the Virgin Mary showed herself to her and basically pushed her onto her mission, basically told her that she was the chosen one to lead the chosen people to the proper place, to righteousness, that the world was ending and she was going to come back. The Virgin Mary was going to come back and, take control of the sinners. And Mary and Credonia's task was to lead the righteous people in the righteous way, and that she already knew what that was. So, child, of course, I mean, to me, this is like you're typing this yourself and making this up. Like, girl, please. But at the time, the way she constructed her image, it all worked together. It really all worked together. The other thing that the Virgin Mary told her, according to Credonia, is that she needed a partner. She needs someone to help her with this mission. And that partner was a man named Joseph K. We're going to just call him Joseph K. Joseph K. And we're going to get into his story next. So our man Joseph K. is the second in command, honestly, the second most important person when it comes to building out the story of the restoration of the Ten Commandments cult, okay? He was born in 1932, so he was significantly older than Credonia, but he was also born to a wealthy landowning family. So by Uganda standards, he came from a powerful family. He was very, very religious, very, very Catholic, and the Catholic clergy in their area put preferential treatment into his family because they were so wealthy, and they wanted those donations. You know how it go. So he was very religious, he was very Catholic, and he was grown up to really believe that he had a higher purpose in this world, to be a leader. He had a very huge ego, in my opinion, and that is, to me, what led him astray, because Credonia could see that from a mile away. But he is our second in command, and let's get into his story. So like I said, Joseph really thought highly of himself. He thought his goal in life, his purpose in life, was to lead the poor people in the way of Catholicism into the new time, into the new age. So basically, he has a huge ego. QBR. But he kind of falls off the map too. I don't know if that's true, but similar to Credonia, a lot of his early years are kind of like, okay, a friend says this, he doesn't really officially get back onto people's radar until 1960, where he meets and marries his wife, Teresa, and he kind of begins to realize, okay, this is my time to step into my truth as being this leader that I've always thought that I was, and I have a beautiful, respectable woman by my side, so it's time to step into that reality. Around the 1980s, where he's really, really, really starting to get in stride, and he kind of is like, I've dedicated my time to the Catholic schools in the area, I've dedicated my time to public service, and now it's time for political office. So this is when Joseph was like, this is my calling, I'm gonna run for office. Okay, now here's the danger with someone with a big ego. They're easily manipulated. They are easily disappointed when life doesn't work out how they see fit, how they believe they're supposed to be treated, and how life is supposed to treat them, child. So he runs for political office, loses, bar none, like flat out loses. And this is a huge turning point for Joseph K. and his mental mind and his bruised ego, which brings out a very different man. That's what a lot of people said. So essentially, he loses. He's very embarrassed by this. He's very outwardly embarrassed and inwardly enraged and resentful by the fact that all the time he dedicated to the school, to public service, did not the fact that his family had money did not automatically mean that he was going to be a political leader. And this is where things start to shift. So Chow, like a dog with its tail between his legs, he ran back to his family's land, embarrassed, resentful by the loss, and hid behind his wealth, essentially. And as time grew on, his power-hungry nature, his ego, was wanting to be fed. So being in control of the workers, by this time his family owned a bunch of land and a prosperous mill and a ton of cattle. So he was very wealthy, especially by Ugandan standards. And so, he, being the leader of his workers, being in control, the head of his household, was no longer enough for him. He wanted more people to rule over, more people to lord over. As we said, this is what he thought his life's purpose was. So what did this man do? He decided to return back to the church, and he decided to build a secondary school on his land that he would be the professor of, he would be the headmaster of, and it would also be on his land, which was perfect for him. He had fresh minds to mold. He had control over the new generation on how they viewed the world, and a positive feedback loop of people in the community that were taught by him, that were led by him, that were molded by him, to where his influence was no longer just the school. His sphere of influence became the whole community, because this is where all the kids ended up going, right? As most people who are ego-driven and power-hungry are when they're in a leadership position, the leadership got to his head and he started to control things. The messaging changed. It was less about the Catholic religion and more about building a monument to himself and to his ego. And he knew that an important part of that is, what did we say? Myth making. So on April 25th, 1984, Joseph K. came to his community and claimed that he had a Marian apparition. He said he saw the Virgin Mary, even though notably less specific than Credonia's images and imagery. He already had these people eating out of the palm of his hands because of the generations and manipulation of all these people who had been molded by him in school. So it didn't really need to be specific. But what it did do was add prestige to his school. Because in a community where there are two schools and it's deeply, deeply Catholic, going to a school where the headmaster and religious teacher had a Marian apparition and was the Virgin Mary showed herself to him, puts you at a leg up. So the prestige is leaking into other aspects of day-to-day life, into their local society, into their local village. And he's using this to build up his image, to build up his control over people, to really, really hone that in at this point and create the mythos around himself in order, much like Credonia, to step into the leadership role. So both of these people were baking at different times and at different rates. Obviously, Credonia is younger than him. But both of these people were on their own journey, both ego-driven, both very manipulative individuals, it's clear to me, both using religion in a particular way, both rising to power at a particular time in Uganda where it's possible for you to kind of change who you are in the mess of the war as a backdrop, in the mess of revolution and civil war as a backdrop. You can become legitimate like Credonia, or you can erase the embarrassment of losing a political office by becoming the powerful Catholic person that you thought you wanted to be even when you were young. So both of them are using this time period in different ways, but it's really interesting to know that they eventually converge at the perfect time in both of their growth to be able to create this toxic cult from hell, basically. So like I said, because he was a big time in his community because of the school, the Marian Apparition now, basically Joseph started to really step into that role, and the local people were playing into it. They thought not only was he the chosen messenger of the message, they were the chosen people, and he started to preach on that. His people who followed his congregation were the chosen people because the Virgin Mary had showed herself to him. So he was basically a big fish in a small pond, but by 1989, that ego, that hunger, that drive to want to control more people started to rear its ugly head, right? So in 1989, this is when Joseph K. and Credonia, our girl, meet for the first time. She basically claims that the Virgin Mary told her that he was supposed to be her partner in crime, that he was the chosen one, and that they were supposed to work together to bring the chosen people to righteousness. This, of course, was a huge injection to Joseph's ego. He took it and ran with it, and Credonia knew that. She knew this man was an ego-driven man. She knew the only way to really get him wrapped around her finger was to appease his ego. So coming to him with ceremony, with the fact that the Virgin Mary had told her and that they were the chosen people, they were leading the right path, and they were in charge of leading people to the righteous path, was all that he needed for him to fully blow up his head to the size of like oblivion, right? And she knew that. So shortly after they met, Credonia had this man wrapped around her finger, which is why she's probably nicknamed the programmer, child. To him, Credonia was a perfect manifestation, personification of religious charisma that he didn't have outwardly. But he, to Credonia, was the unlimited pockets that she needed in order to buy control, to make her religion more powerful, more legitimate, more credible. So in 1989, the first converts to the movement of the restoration of the Ten Commandments cult were Joseph and his family, and that is when everything started. They begin working together. She continues to tell him that he's a chosen one, he is the leader of the chosen people, stroking his ego, and it's working because in reality, in the Ugandan society post-colonialism during this time was very male-centric, very sexist, and it was unheard of for a powerful woman to exist, especially in a religious place. But she was okay with foregoing the public recognition of being the creator and the leader and the founder of this religion, if that meant that she had access to the unlimited pockets of Joseph and access to him being the front man, the fall guy. She was okay with that because she knew that behind the scenes, she controlled everything. Nothing would move without her on it. So because he had sway in the community, she used that in order to filter her message through him to start to infect the community. At this point, remember, he had the school. He had everyone in the community in his hand. He had the money. So she submitted to him publicly, but he really was submitting to her privately. Joseph K's son basically said, from that point on, Cordonia was moved into the family household. Not only was she moved into the family household, she was beating all of the kids. She was taking control of the family household, and his father was just in awe by Cordonia's power. He wouldn't question her. Everything that she said needed to be done would get done, and she was given full control over his family, essentially. And this is where things start to take a turn, because now they're in the building phase. How do we build a congregation? How do we build a powerful movement around this ideology that the Virgin Mary told us, right? Both these people are unwell. We know that. But, the Virgin Mary told them that they were righteous. So basically, she basically says, she's going to build her congregation like Christ is by slowly converting more and more people over time. And that required Joseph K to sell off a lot of his land. So they could have more liquid cash in order to be able to really, really get and move up in Ugandan society and have credibility with the cash behind it, right? So she convinced him to sell a lot of his inheritance, a lot of his land, for her own benefit. She knew how to manipulate this dude, man. I'm telling you, her skills of manipulation, it's really crazy. So Cordonia is in control of his own household. Mind you, he's still married to Teresa, but she's playing the background at this point. She told him to sell a good portion of his land, told him to take his kids even out of his own school that he controlled, and implemented really strict homeschooling for the children, and basically was controlling and honing in her control over this family and starting to build what would become a huge movement in Uganda. So at this point, the foundation was laid. Cordonia really stepped into her role as a programmer, which is what she was called within the movement, which was the true controller of the church. As we know, she holds all the strings. And Joseph K was described as the figurehead and bestowed the title of the bishop of the church. So now what did they need? They needed a clergy hierarchical system in order to fill up the different roles of the church so that when they came correct. Do you know what I'm saying? Period. Mind you, again, we are in the midst of a civil war in Uganda. This is, again, still the backdrop that Cordonia is using to build her power. And in times of crisis, a lot of people turn to religion. So as their whole society is beginning to fall apart around them as they know it, a lot of people are turning to the Catholic system as a means of, really the only shining example of any kind of order in this chaotic time. So the power, the prestige of the Catholic religion and the Catholic Church was really being hammered home, because for a lot of people, this is their only way of hope. This is their only way of any kind of control or, power that could really, really help heal Uganda. So all of this is moving. Mind you, I'm only setting the context. Part 2 is about to be crazy, child. But this is all happening. She is stirring this massive pot. The timing, the people, the money, everything is working together in order to create the perfect storm. And Cordonia knows this. She is using this situation as a perfect time to become a legitimate saint. And it works. So what eventually ended up becoming the inner circle of the restoration of the 10 Commandments was this woman named, I think it's either Scholastica or Scholastica, either it's Scholastica or Scholastica. This woman, okay, and her husband became part of the inner circle. Their son Joseph, who was at this point in time going to school, going to theology school, Catholic school, to become some sort of person in the official version of the Catholic Church. He became a part of the inner circle, and a priest by the name of Dominic, who was really close to Joseph in his formative years, was brought in as well to be a part of the inner circle. So we have Cordonia, we have Joseph K., who are the two, the programmer, the bishop. Then we have Scholastica, her husband, and their son Joseph, who are also a part of the inner circle. And then they have Dominic, who is also a part of the inner circle. And this is basically the basis of their clergy for the restoration of the 10 Commandments cult, okay? And they all basically, there's no real record on how they all came into contact. What is probably widely assumed is that they all kind of knew of each other in the area at some point in time, and using her programmer mind, Cordonia was able to spot the proper people for the proper positions, so she probably approached them on that kind of tip. But of course, in the official divine doctrine of the restoration of the 10 Commandments cult, there's lots of mythos and mystique around how these people were found. So, for example, in Scholastica's case, Cordonia writes in this divine text that she walked a long journey and came across this light of a person, Scholastica, and knew that she needed to be a part of this. That wasn't true. She already knew the girl, and basically they are in the perfect position to really start to build, because at this point, like I said, the Catholic Church was becoming the only place of order in Uganda at this point in time. And a lot of these people, Scholastica, her husband, her son Joseph, as well as Dominic, all had deep ties within the official clergyman Catholic Church. So by bringing them to the restoration of the 10 Commandments, what Cordonia knew is that it also adds an air of legitimacy. But what the truth of the matter is, as we break it down, all these people had egos, and all these people were not able to move to the places that they thought they wanted to be in when it came to the Catholic Church officially. So Cordonia saw that they had bruised egos and were not where they wanted to be. So she offered them a high enough place in her own religion for them to feel appreciated enough to come over here. But what she was getting was priceless. She was getting full legitimacy, full control of these people, but full credibility of her religion. If people that high up in the actual Catholic Church wanted to move to her religion, what is she selling? What does she got going on? Is she really truly the person on a righteous path, more of a righteous path than the official Catholic Church shall? And she knew that that would help bring a congregation of people to her to manipulate and control. I'm telling you, this woman, she's on to something. These people that she was able to convert, these are the second group of people that she was able to convert into the restoration of the 10 Commandments cult. And she's building this ground up. She killed her old self, built up her new self, found Joseph, knew he was the perfect mark to be her partner, manipulated him and his family for his money and credibility and power, used that to then be able to find the clergy people who had legitimacy in the actual Catholic Church, had deep connections, were highly educated, and knew a lot of people in the surrounding communities to be her next group of converts. So then people started trickling in like a flood. She was able to spot the proper people to convert early on to be able to bring more and more and more converts to her congregation. And her tactic for being able to spot the right people is why she was able to convert the right people. She was able to go into whole entire communities, say a speech, and convert them all to be a part of the restoration of the 10 Commandments cult. When I tell you, child, when I tell you her manipulation, her control, nothing, the way she read people, unheard of. So Credonia did this amazing thing of marketing herself and marketing her church, not as necessarily different than the Catholic Church, but the true Catholicism, because in this time of extreme volatility and all of these things, she was making a point to say, the Catholic Church is corrupt. I am the truth. I am the light. I am the true Catholic path. If you were truly Catholic, you're not going to be with them. You're going to be with me. Dominic she makes as the vicar general, which in the normal establishment of the Catholic Church is highly coveted. So Dominic's already getting what he wanted. This is a position he wanted in the Catholic Church but was never going to get. Now he has it with Credonia. She knows that. So he has the space as vicar general. Joseph and his parents, Scholastica and his father, all are apostles of the church. So they are being awarded with positions that they would never have gotten in the church. And it all starts to really mesh and work together. She's masterful. So before they could really explode onto the scene, the next point that Credonia noticed is that they needed an official religious text to set them apart from the Catholic Church as an establishment. So Credonia started to work on the official religious text. Of course, the Bible is a end-all be-all in this religion, but Credonia knew that if she had a religious text that centered the Virgin Mary and centered how and mythologized the story of how all of these people came together for this religion to be the chosen religion, the Marian Apparitions, how she met her apostles, how she met the vicar general, how she met Joseph, she mythologized it in this book and was able to sell that, because that was the selling tool to prove that they were different than the Catholic Church. So before they could really start growing their congregation, she knew the next step. I have all the right people in place. I need my own type of Bible that I'm writing myself. So she wrote the Bible for her congregation. And the Bible for the restoration of the 10 Commandments is called, A Timely Message from Heaven. That is what she named it. And baby, once she had that, perfect marketing play, boom, they hit the scene. In other words, Credonia used her mythologized story that she'd been building up for all of this time in order to center herself as the clearest vision to save the Ugandan people and clear the way to full righteousness. She is the truth. She is the direct connection to God, child. She is like masterful. Like it's like watching somebody, like a masterpiece being made in the most like obviously toxic, tragic way, of course. But it's like when you think about the different pieces she put into the puzzle, how she knew next step is clergy, next step is this, next step is I'm writing my own Bible. This bitch is not to be fucked with at all. She is a smart bitch, honey. And this is where it all gets mixed up into the perfect storm. Because by the time Credonia finished her Bible, her version of her Bible, the dictatorship fell. So for a lot of people in Uganda, it really did feel like the end was near, because life as they knew it was collapsing around them, right? Remember, she already spotted this from time. I'm going to use the chaos of the time to thrust myself into legitimacy and statehood. Those were her actions from the beginning, right? So dictatorship falls, everyone's freaked out, and on top of this, it's now 1990, and they are 10 years from the year 2000, which for a lot of people around the world was a very, very, very freaky year, especially in Uganda, combined with what they had just gone through with the civil war and the falling of their political system as they knew it. The 2000, the new millennia, for so many people was like big fat question mark in the scariest, most apprehensive way. Y2K, Google Y2K. People really thought that computers were going to stop and the whole world was going to collapse. Like, people really thought. That's what Y2K means. It's not just like Y2K fashion. Y2K was like a movement in people's mind that people thought once New Year's 2000 hits, the world as we know it is going to be over. So what did Credonia do? She spotted that apprehension 10 years ahead of time. Her Bible had just dropped. She dropped the best Bible of the year. Uganda had fallen, the dictatorship had fallen, and she was using that for her advantage, honey. And that's where we're going to stop the story. Because part 2, baby, when I tell you, honey. Like I said, that wraps up part 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Get ready for part 2. Part 2 is dropping next week. If you like this video, like and subscribe to the channel. If you are new here, hi, thank you for coming. Kiss, kiss, hug, hug. Please comment down below. Watch all the ads, people. Your girl's monetized. Watch all the ads. Let them know that you like my content, please. You've gotten me this far. Especially when it comes to making detailed research videos like this. Please watch these ads for your girl. But yeah, comment, like the video, interact with it so it can do better in the algorithm. Expect part 2 to drop next Thursday. But without further ado, Black Lives Matter and free Palestine until it's backwards. Love you guys so much. See ya.